Welcome to the Lighting Your Way podcast. I'm your host, Guardian Nurses founder, Betty Long. During season 3, we'll be delving in deeper to the amazing lives and stories of nurses and other healthcare professionals from around the country. We'll also be talking with a few of my nurse advocate colleagues at Guardian Nurses. You'll get a behind-the-scenes peek at the healthcare system, as well as get advice on how to get the best care when you or a loved one is a patient. War is a difficult reality, filled with unspeakable horrors and trauma. The latest conflict in Ukraine has only underscored this, and we get to see those horrors and trauma on our television screens, our smartphones, and our computers. In this age of 24/7 news cycles and ubiquitous social media, our children, like us, are experiencing the visceral day-to-day reality of war in the Ukraine. Imagine if World War II or the Vietnam War had played out live on television, phones, and computer screens all over the world. On top of feeling pained by each news story and worried about friends and family members and stressing about the economic effects of the war, parents are also grappling with another concern. How do I explain this to my children? In our most recent issue of the Guardian Nurses e-newsletter, The Flame, we addressed talking with kids about war. Based on the amount of feedback we received, along with additional questions, we thought it would be helpful to bring in two of our pediatric nurses, Lauren Gant and Robin Sambuco. Robin is also our Vice President of Operations, and have a more in-depth conversation with them. Take a listen. Welcome, Robin and Lauren. Thank you really so much for taking the time to join me today. It is great to have you as guests and certainly a hot topic to talk about.
Thanks, Betty. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, that's great, Betty, to be with you and Lauren talking about such a difficult topic.
Yes, it is a difficult topic, and sadly, one that we have to deal with. Again, we thought COVID was going to be the most difficult topic that we talked about with kids. But, so we're here today to talk about how to talk with kids about war. Last week's issue, and I think I told you both this, last week's issue of our electronic newsletter, The Flame, addressed the same topic, but through the last week, we got so much feedback. I thought it might be helpful to have you both on kind of live and talking about it. Now, you are both pediatric nurses and both worked on staff at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Robin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey to go into pediatrics?
Oh, sure. Absolutely, Betty. So my journey began when I was 4 years old. My parents rushed me to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for what they thought was an acute illness. I ended up spending a week in the ICU. And as years went on, my parents would have conversations with me about the nurses that cared for me and their compassion. And so I believe I was a junior in high school when I decided that I really wanted to be a nurse.
Wow.
And
wow.
Off to nursing school I go.
It was that easy to convince you just by talking to you. Do you have a memory of being at the hospital at 4?
I don't really have a memory of being in the hospital, but I had the great opportunity of working with one of my primary physicians when I was hired as a new grad to work at CHOP.
Oh, wow. Did he remember, or he or she remember you?
I went right up to him and told him who I was.
Wow. Was he scared?
No. He remembered me. He remembered my parents, and it was just nice to see him.
Wow.
And obviously, he was excited for me to be a nurse.
Yeah. So you went to college, got your bachelor's degree in nursing, and then went right into CHOP. So you knew right away you were going to be a pediatric nurse?
Yes, but I needed to wait a little bit just because when I graduated, there wasn't a plethora of jobs like there are now. it
Oh,
was, hard to get a nursing job back when I graduated.
wow. That's hard to believe, isn't it now? Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. So you got your job at CHOP and you were there how long?
I was there in various different roles for about 17 years.
Wow. Great. That's great. And now you came to Guardian Nurses because of that experience, if I remember correctly, because we needed a pediatric nurse, and you got referred to us through another colleague, and voila, and here you are. And
Yep.
you are really one besides Lauren. I mean, you are one of the go-to people. I know we all go to for pediatric issues or questions. So, how about you, Lauren? How about what was your journey to pediatrics?
Yeah. So I growing up, I danced, and then I started teaching dance to kids. And so I loved working with the kids. That was probably one of my favorite things. And growing up, like I knew I wanted to work with kids in some capacity, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do.
Okay.
My cousin went into nursing school, and she kind of, showed me what nursing is, and kind of was the person to inspire me to become a nurse. And so when I did decide to do nursing, I knew from the gate, like I wanted to do pediatrics. I worked at CHOP I went to CHOP as a co-op. I went to Drexel, and they have like a co-op program where you work there for 6 months, you follow a nurse, and it's a really awesome experience. And I stayed on at CHOP after that as a tech, and then I worked as a nurse on the unit that
Wow.
I did my co-op. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, it really is. I mean, CHOP is such a great facility to have, and I know it's one of the top pediatric hospitals, but I know that they do a good job of bringing young nurses along. So good for you both. So I am looking forward. I know that at various times you both have worked at CHOP in different, like Robin, I think you were there during the Gulf War, I think, right? So in
Yeah.
terms of talking to the children, that was something that was interesting. So when you're a nurse inpatient, right, and say there's something tragic going on, like 9/11 or the Gulf War or now the Ukraine war, right? So
Mm-hmm.
as an inpatient nurse, like are the kids, obviously the kids aren't watching TV, they're probably too young, but when their parents come in, like how does that work if you're, the parent comes in and wants to throw on CNN, maybe to catch up because they were at work all day? What's that like? Do you try to protect the children from visual images?
The floors that I worked on, Betty, the kids were all ages. And if, a parent was sitting there watching perhaps, the news or some type of event, I would take the child to what's called the playroom,
Okay.
or I would bring games, into them to distract them from knowing possibly what's on TV.
Okay.
But I will say, the parents are so consumed with what's going on with their child that there's more of, I guess a push for the child watching, their favorite shows or movies or,
Okay.
playing than there is, watching regular TV.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes
Yeah.
sense. And Lauren, was that your experience as well?
Yeah, I agree. The unit I worked on was all ages as well. We actually had a lot of teenagers too. And then I worked in the emergency department, and I agree. Like, I feel like a lot of the times, it's all about the kids, right? Like they're sick, and it's allowing them to have some kind of control. So a lot of times they were just watching whatever they normally watch.
Okay.
And then the same thing, like if something were on TV that maybe wasn't appropriate, but the parents wanted to watch it, it's the same thing, like taking them out of that situation or bringing in something that would interest them, to take their minds off of whatever's going on and occupy them in a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
And at the point at which you were both, Robin, you might have been a little bit older where the kid, because kids who are teenagers are probably going to have their smartphone, right? Robin, did the teenagers have iPhones? I feel like I'm dating myself. Did kids have iPhones when you were working?
Not when I was on the floor. No, there was
Right.
not iPhones.
Yeah, really. How many years that, right? Boy. Lauren, how about you? I know that was more recently, but did you find teenagers kind of always on their phones, kind of looking and
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it really wasn't always on their phone. I feel like they would have moments where they were messaging their friends and stuff, but a lot
okay.
of times, like, music therapy comes in or art therapy. So I feel like they try to keep them busy when they're in the hospital, and most of the kids
Okay.
enjoy it. So I don't think that
Great.
I didn't notice a lot of, use of cell phones, to be honest.
That's good. So at least in the inpatient environment, the environment it's more controlled and you obviously could limit the exposure to visual images of war and bombs going off and,
Hmm.
children leaving their parents and, going into the train. So both of
Yeah.
you are moms to two boys. Ironically, you both have two sons. Although Robin, your boys are a little older, I think, than Lauren's. So you're both dealing with this issue of talking with your kids about war at home as well as at work. And Lauren, I want to talk a little bit about some of your patients later. But Robin, let me ask you: your youngest son is 13, right, and in high school.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. He's a
no
young
doubt,
teenager.
no doubt, he's on social media. What have you done as a mom to help him understand what's going on with the invasion of Ukraine?
Well, Betty, as one of the toughest jobs of being a parent is talking to your children about, difficult situations,
Right.
especially what's going on in Ukraine. But I feel like addressing these tough conversations, definitely makes kids feel safer, and it
Hmm.
also strengthens your relationship and teaches your child about the world. Now,
Okay.
again, my son's a young teenager, so I'm able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I always think about how it would be, a good idea as a parent to use your kid's age, right, and their developmental stage as a guide to starting to talk about tough conversations. There's
Good.
actually a blog that I love. It's actually called Two Peds in a Pod. And the peds, right, is for pediatric.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And co-founders are actually two pediatricians. And it's a blog where other parents can go on and they're talking about these, tough topics, COVID-19 and war and, you know, uh, other topics like racism. And they do this phenomenal job of being able to give you suggestions on how you can communicate to your children in an effective way based on their age.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, it's really, really neat. But what I would say for me at home and my, youngest son, I'm really encouraging open conversations. I know my son and I, may not agree on certain topics. And as you know, Betty, the parent is sometimes never right.
Right.
But as a parent, I want to, listen to my son and kind of find out how he thinks.
Okay.
I also try to ask him open-ended questions. And, one of those questions that came up recently was, if you were in charge of the United States, the most powerful country, what would you do as a leader today? And I think by asking that question,
Wow.
right, I think by asking that question, it really opens up the conversation with you and possibly your teenage child. I
Wow.
think
Okay.
another
Was that
area
intended,
that,
Rob? I'm sorry. Was that intended to kind of elicit his conversation about the war, like supporting the war or not supporting the war? What was your thought behind asking him that?
yeah, I think that, it was about what's going on in the world right now and bringing your values and your compassion, into your answer.
Okay. Yeah. And what did can you share the answer?
So my son was, of course, very respectful, and as a leader, and me being a, pediatric nurse, of course, his first question was, I would help the children.
Right.
So,
Right.
that made me feel good as a mom. But
I love
on
that.
on the flip side of it, it's a shame that, our children have to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the suggestions that we did make in last week's video. Like a lot of the kids want to help. Even some of our nurses, when I ask them what their children are asking them, the small children, 6 years old, and Lauren, I'll ask you about yours, but 6-year-old children are saying, what about the kids? Can we have some? Can we bring some of them over? Right. The small children. So that's interesting to me that Blair was thinking about that. Lauren, what about you? I mean, what have you done with your kids to help them understand, if at all, what's going on with Ukraine?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like my kids' age, so I have a 4-year-old son and a 2-year-old son. And I feel like at this time in the world, it's like a blessing because they are in their own little bubbles. And, I personally don't watch the news because I do have anxiety and I just feel like it's just so negative anymore. So we never have it on in my house. But I know that they go to their grandparents' house or their aunt's house. Or, at school, they have teachers that might be talking about things. So, I try to keep it super simple. Like, I don't really bring it up very often, but if they make a comment or, we're talking and it comes up in conversation, I try to focus with them, not necessarily on the war, but just in general, that, sometimes, people get angry at other people and sometimes, just like, they get angry with one of their friends sometimes, and it's okay to feel that way. That, sometimes they don't see eye to eye, and that's okay. But, I just try to keep it simple, and I just let them know, out in this world, there's good, there's bad, there's kind, and there's not so kind. And I try to get them to be kind. But we don't really talk necessarily about the war, but just about, things in general, I guess.
Were they impacted by COVID? I mean, were they going to school? Were they kind of curious about why they had to stay home or wear masks, or did that impact them?
I feel like no. So they were in like a daycare preschool program, and so they did have to stay home. And honestly, we had a lot of their teachers from the school come and watch them at home, and they thought it was the best thing, to be honest, because they had all this attention that they, they have to share at school. So I think that they're just so like in their, like I said, their own bubble that they're kind of oblivious. And they thought we're cool, like Spider-Man and superheroes, and so they were like excited to wear them.
That's great.
So yeah.
That's a good way to frame the superhero, right? And they're all. Yeah, I was. I think, where were we, Ram? We were at a school the other day, and I saw kids wearing masks. It was the airport, and I thought, they're kind of acclimated to the fact that this is what the world looks like now. They just kind of assimilated and picked it up. So, Rob, let me go back to you. I think one of the most often suggested tips that I've read in researching our newsletter, to write the newsletter, was that we as adults should not shelter kids. And I think you mentioned this in the way you talked to your sons. We shouldn't shelter them from the reality of war and conflict. In your opinion, Rob, why is that important?
Yeah, that's a great question, Betty. Well, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to talk about war to anyone.
True.
But we know our world is so far from perfect right now, unfortunately. And it's especially difficult to talk with children about war. I think giving kids access to media, it's near impossible to protect them from all this frightening and confusing world events.
Yeah.
But while your instinct, right, as a parent might be to shield them from all these bad events in the world,
Yeah.
Eventually that teenage child or, that 10-year-old is going to find out the information somehow, whether it be from their friends in the classroom or social media, right? Think about TikTok, YouTube, Instagram,
Right.
all those things.
Right.
So, I would say, Betty, it's important not to dismiss your children's curiosity and anxiety about these world events.
Yeah.
I would, take them seriously, listen to your children, discuss what they're seeing and hearing on the news, and make sure that you're monitoring it, right? That you're able to help kids avoid, any false sources of information. Ask them, where's your source coming from, or where did you see that?
Right.
So that, that makes, maybe their anxiety and fear less of a burden.
Yeah. No, that's good. Good point about the social media, because you can do a lot, right? I mean, when I was growing up, we only had TVs, and so my mother and father could just turn off the TV, and we didn't see anything. And of course, there wasn't cable news, which is blasting news 24/7. Breaking news is happening every minute, hour. So it's this, kind of a constant news source, and kids can pick up on it, in any way. Like you can walk past a store or walk past a bar and see it on the TV. Lauren, would you add anything to Robin's answer?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything Robin said. I think really opening that line of communication, allowing them to say how they're feeling, and then letting them know it's okay to feel how they're feeling. I think it's important to validate, what they're going through and how they're feeling. And I think that helps them to communicate too as it continues, as things continue. It helps to develop a relationship and trust, and it kind of gives them a safe space. So I think, validating their feelings, allowing them to tell you and letting them know that it's okay to be scared or, to be sad, and just, being there for them in that way.
Yeah. What if, like with your children, they're so young, like what if the kids can't articulate what they're feeling? Like, when their behavior, like what are you looking for if you're a parent?
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that, because I've recently noticed this with my 4-year-old, that kids can't always, especially at that age, verbalize, how they're feeling. That's why they throw tantrums. That's why they, do certain things. But lately, my older one has been telling me his belly hurts. And that's a way that sometimes they have these feelings, and sometimes they do like show as physical symptoms. And he'll say, "Mommy, my belly hurts. Can you come sit with me?" And I go sit with him for a few minutes, and then everything's better. So I'm noticing that I think at times that he is like anxious, or he can't really communicate how he's feeling. It's not anger, because he always throws tantrums when he's angry. But like when something's going on that he can't explain, he tells me his belly hurts. I sit with him for a little bit, and then, everything's fine. So it's important to watch that in that age, that, sometimes if you notice they're saying the same thing, like my belly hurts, or Mommy, I don't feel good, or something's going on that's like not normal. It's important to acknowledge it and kind of see what's going on. And it might actually be physical, like he might not feel good, but a lot of times too, it's also, mental and emotional, and things that they can't really, talk about.
Right. Rob, how about you with I know you have some young nephews and stuff. Are similar experiences?
Yeah, so Betty, I would add to Lauren's point, right, if the children that are, inpatient, right, as pediatric nurses, we see, the headache or the belly ache because they're anxious or upset. And we would have the music therapist come in or the art therapist come in. And so, I kind of took that and brought that in my house.
Okay.
Right? We can roll out a huge, roll of paper and crayons and markers, and you might have, a tambourine in your house that you can do some music with. right? Kind of changing the setting to decrease the anxiety or the fear of that child. I think, it's really important, to keep the child busy, but, to
Right.
also let them know that they're okay, and then maybe move on to something that's fun for them to do.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's good to note that, you can't always articulate, even some adults can't articulate how they're feeling, right? But
Yeah.
excuse me. But so Rob, let me shift over to you. There's a lot of images, right, of bombs exploding, of buildings being destroyed, people, packing up their belongings and going to other countries. I know that one of the most often asked questions from young children, even on our team, is, "Are we going to get bombed?" And how would you answer that
Right.
question?
So, Betty, if it was a teenager asking the question, right, you can be a little bit more direct than a younger child, let's say an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old. Understanding, how the child perceives the world, right, through their developmental phases is just so important. Every child's different. And as a parent, you need to use your best judgment based on your own child. You know them the best. Remember, there's no right or wrong answer, but there are suggestions on
Right.
blogs, on pediatric websites that could really help parents to be direct, but also to alleviate any fears and use age-appropriate words to discuss, what's going on
Okay.
TV sets today.
Yeah, it made me sit like when one of our colleagues said that about her son. I was like, "Oh, geez, that makes me sad," right? Because again,
Mhm.
my experience growing up was that we didn't see that type of stuff. Even during the Vietnam War, which is when I was growing up, we just got a news report at night, and they controlled the news, right? The government controlled the
Right.
news, so you never knew what was happening. But obviously, it's playing out right here in everybody's living room. Um, Lauren,
Right.
one of our colleagues here at Guardian Nurses told me the other day that she'll watch the news for like maybe 5-10 minutes each night after work. But last week, her 6-year-old son asked her, "Who is Putin and why is he bullying other people?" I thought that
Mm.
was very insightful. How would you
Yeah.
help her answer that?
Yeah. I mean, 6 is still, an age where it's hard because they can only understand so much, right? Like they can only, it's a lot of it for them is like black and white, like there's good and bad, or,
Okay.
we talk about bullying a lot in our house. And, I think describing who Putin is would be, I guess, comparing him to our president. Like, how we have a president, so does Russia, and just letting them know, like, I think at
Okay.
that age, it would still kind of be like, maybe this country is angry at this country, and so they're not
Okay.
getting along right now. And,
Okay.
what we can do, is be kind. Like I try to teach kindness. And I think maybe changing, yes, he's bullying and it's not right. But what we could do is help those people by donating things or, getting them involved in like in the kind aspect of it.
Okay.
And saying like, that's not nice, but this is what we can do to help. I think it's still keeping it super simple
Okay.
for them at that age and kind of just trying to, change their perspective of, yes, he's bullying people, but what can we do to help the
Okay.
people that he's bullying, just as you would do at school?
Okay. Right. I just saw an image the other day of a bunch of toys at a train station, I think it was, so that when the children from Ukraine arrive in Poland, that they can pick up a toy, so that their arrival to a new country is kind of well, I won't say joyful, but they get a new toy, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
a good image. Um, Robin, I know that one of our suggestions in last week's issue of the Flame was to encourage giving back, and Lauren talked a little bit about that, right? Encourage giving back and helping others. Why is that
Mhm.
helpful for kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lauren hit on a couple of good points, right? Volunteering and helping others is also a great way to give kids a sense of calmness and control. Heck, it's even good for us adults too, Betty.
Right. I know. It's not just for children.
Right.
That's right. Good suggest. Good point. Good point.
Yeah. And, instead of letting the child be overwhelmed, or maybe, the parent is overwhelmed, you can turn a major crisis or an event in the world, like the invasion of Ukraine, into an opportunity to, give back to others. Just like, Lauren said, in the classroom, right? Helping each other out. There are some ways that kids can come back and feel like they're making a difference. And Betty, I know you talked about some of these, in the flame, raising money for an aid organization through crafts or a fundraiser, writing letters to our veterans. I know a lot of schools do that, and they also send care packages to the military.
That's cool.
Volunteering, volunteering for an organization like perhaps UNICEF, a humanitarian organization focused on helping children in crisis gain access to clean water and food. I think that pushing the parents and children to help is just so important.
Yeah. Well, it's just like Lauren said, right? I mean, she's focusing on kindness, right? And that's a life lesson that is never going to go wasted, right? Whether it's talking about Ukraine and the children that are affected by the war there, or the children that are watching the war here. If we can instill in our children and in our adults kindness, that is never to be wasted. So I think it's a good point. And I do think UNICEF, I've done some research on UNICEF just in terms of their website, and they have a lot of resources talking about children, talking about how you can help the families that are displaced, the refugee families over in Ukraine. Lauren, I know you're working now with a lot of our pediatric patients in one of our large clients. Has this topic come up? I mean, have you been suggesting, or parents asking you about how to talk to their kids about war? Is it coming up for you in your practice?
Yeah, so sometimes it does actually, when we are just talking in general, and the parents, we'll start talking about it and how hard it is for their kids and for them, and how to really make that connection. So with the younger kids, like I've been saying, like with mine, keeping it simple, and trying to see some kind of positive in all of this negative, right? Like trying to get them to focus on, helping. And then acknowledging for a lot of the older kids and kids who can kind of understand, like acknowledging that this is happening, talking to their kids about what's happening, finding out what they know, and finding out how it makes them feel. Again, validating their feelings and letting them know it's okay to be scared, or it's okay to be sad. Right. And I would also recommend acknowledging the fact that your child's opening up to you. I know that it can be hard, especially like the teenage years. I feel like it's hard to really talk about how you're feeling. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to let them know how happy you are that they're actually talking with you, and allowing them to express their feelings. And I feel like that would also have them continue the conversation.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Because we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in a month or 2 months. And, we don't know what the situation is going to be. So keeping that line of communication open and kind of being a safe space for your kid, right, I feel like is so important. And that's kind of what I tell the parents now when we talk about it.
That's great. That's a great, because we don't know. I mean, from all reports, it may be a long, drawn out conflict, and hopefully not escalated to any other countries. I'm sorry, I must have a frog in my throat. All right, so one last question to both of you, and Robin, I'm going to ask you first. If you could give our listeners one suggestion as to how to help them help their children and I know we've talked a lot about it, I think I know what your answers might be, but if they can give us one suggestion to help their kids during what might be, as Lauren mentioned, a long drawn out conflict, what would that suggestion be?
Yeah, I think, listen to your children,
Okay.
right? Listen to what they're telling you, or listen to what they're asking you. Stop what you're doing, maybe sit down with them, and just listening to them is so important and makes them feel so much safer. And Betty, I'd also add, be mindful of as a parent, if you see any changes in your child, right?
Okay.
Their heads down at the dinner table, or they're staying in their room more, or to, Lauren's point, they're complaining of belly pain.
Right.
Be mindful of that and reach out to your pediatrician.
Right. Great. Yeah. And get off the phone.
Yeah.
Put the phone down and talk to your child. Don't text them. Lauren, how about you? What would your one suggestion be?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I was going to add that, Betty, that like sit down with your kid, look them in the eyes, put the phone down, turn the TV off, and just listen. Teach that, just have a real conversation. Back before we had phones, and that's how we communicated. Like, just look them in the eyes, have a heart to heart, a real conversation. Keep the line of communication open. Check in with them every once in a while. Like, if they're not, coming out and just talking to you about it, check in with them. How are you feeling? Like, just to have a conversation. And then listen to what your kids aren't saying. Again, sometimes they're going to show you in different ways if they're not talking. So just pay attention, validate their feelings, and just, be their safe space.
So this just occurred to me when I mean, all of those suggestions are fantastic. And I think that particularly the suggestion about putting the phone down and talking to your child, giving them the space and the room to have a conversation and be uninterrupted. But when you think back on your growing up, Robin, I know that you're a little older than Lauren, but did your parents do that for you? Did they like sit you down and say, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
both of your parents did? Okay. No, that's great. That's great. I think because generationally, I mean, I think back, I'm older than you guys, but I think back on, my parents. I don't remember. I mean, and, there was the Vietnam War. Kennedy was shot. I think my mom, I did remember that. And she explained that to me. But there wasn't, a lot of attention, just like sitting down. How do you feel? Right. What's going on. But when we talk, and again, thank God we didn't have war. We had the Vietnam War. I'm just curious. Lauren, how about you? I mean, you're the youngest of the three of us. Did your parents offer that space to you?
Yeah, I mean, I was in high school when 9/11 happened. And, my parents were very good, I'll be honest, at keeping our line of communication open. Like, I was very honest with them about everything in my life, sometimes maybe too honest. I feel like they did a really good job at that. And I feel like because of that, I could tell them things that maybe I wouldn't necessarily have been comfortable with. So
that's great.
Yeah, they were they were that.
That's great. And Rob, was there anything that happened when you were growing up that your parents gave you that space?
Yeah, I mean, to Lauren's point, when 9/11 happened, I was a nurse at CHOP. So, being in the healthcare field during, 9/11 brought up a lot of conversations. Though I was an adult, right, it still brought up a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
I wasn't married yet. I still lived at home. So, I was talking to my parents when I was home for dinner.
Great.
About what's going on and what's also going on in the healthcare world.
Right. Well, I think that also, if we parlay that same issue, right, with even the nursing staff who have experienced COVID for the last 2 years, that they would often come home and not talk about what they had to go through that day. They just kept it to themselves, and now we're seeing the effect. Some nurses, a lot of nurses are leaving. A lot of them are feeling a little bit, I don't want to say burnout, but, compassion fatigue. So, to get it out and to talk about how you're feeling obviously is much more therapeutic than keeping it in. And I think that's true with adults as well as children. So I think we could all learn a lesson from our peds nurses as usual. Well, thank you both for joining me today. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully, we'll give some tips to some parents out there in the world, and hopefully this war will be short. So thanks for joining.
Hopefully. Thanks for having us,
Thank
Betty.
you.
Okay, you're welcome. Take care. If you have any questions that you would like us to address in a future episode, please email us at podcast@guardiannurses.com. That email again is podcast@guardiannurses.com. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us this week. You can find the Lighting Your Way podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, YouTube, Spotify, and Stitcher. If you liked what you heard, tell a friend and leave us a review. You can learn all about Guardian Nurses Healthcare Advocates on our website, guardiannurses.com. So until next time, find some joy in your life, pet all the good doggies and kitties, and remember to tell your people that you love them. Take care.